Imagine archaeologists uncovering a monument so ancient that it predates Stonehenge by nearly 6,000 years, and the Great Pyramid of Giza by more than 7,000 years. Now imagine discovering that the people who built it supposedly had no metal tools, no writing, no pottery, and according to everything historians once believed, they weren't even living in permanent villages. It sounds impossible. Yet hidden beneath a quiet hill in southeastern Turkey lies a place that has forced experts to rewrite one of the biggest chapters in human history. For decades, textbooks taught us that humans first became farmers, then built villages, and only after that created temples and organized religion. But what if that timeline was completely backward? What if one mysterious archaeological site proved that our ancestors were capable of astonishing achievements thousands of years earlier than anyone ever imagined? This is the incredible story of Göbekli Tepe, the ancient monument that changed history forever. ##### A hill that hid a secret. In southeastern Turkey, not far from the modern city of Şanlıurfa, stands a gentle limestone hill. To anyone passing by, it looked completely ordinary. For centuries, local farmers noticed strange pieces of carved stone sticking out of the ground. Most assumed they were simply old gravestones or the remains of forgotten ruins. Even professional archaeologists visited the site during the 1960s, but after a brief survey, they concluded that it wasn't particularly important. The hill was catalogued, a few notes were taken, and everyone moved on. No one realized they were standing above one of the greatest archaeological discoveries ever made. Everything changed in 1994. That year, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt visited the hill. Unlike earlier researchers, he immediately noticed something unusual about the limestone fragments scattered across the surface. These weren't random stones. They had been deliberately carved by human hands. And the style of the carvings looked far older than anyone expected. Schmidt later said he knew almost instantly that this was either an extraordinary discovery, or someone else would uncover it if he walked away. He chose to stay. That decision would change archaeology forever. ##### The first excavations. As excavation teams carefully removed layers of soil, massive stone pillars slowly began to emerge. They weren't small monuments. Some stood more than 16 feet, or nearly 5 meters, tall, weighing between 10 and 20 tons each. The pillars formed enormous circular structures unlike anything archaeologists had ever seen from this period of history. Even more astonishing were the intricate carvings covering many of the stones. Foxes, lions, wild boars, snakes, scorpions, vultures, cranes. Every surface seemed alive with carefully carved animals, each created with remarkable skill despite the builders having only simple stone tools. The deeper the team dug, the more unbelievable the sight became. This wasn't the work of a small family or a wandering group of hunters. This was an enormous construction project that would have required planning, cooperation, engineering, and hundreds of workers. But according to everything historians believed at the time, people weren't supposed to be capable of this. ###### A date that shocked the world. Archaeologists collected charcoal and organic material from the excavation and sent samples for radiocarbon dating. When the results came back, many researchers could hardly believe them. Gobekli Tepe dated to around 9600 BCE. That made it more than 11,000 years old. To understand how extraordinary that is, consider this. When the builders of Stonehenge began raising their famous stones, Gobekli Tepe had already been ancient for thousands of years. When the Great Pyramid of Giza was constructed, this mysterious sanctuary had already been buried beneath the earth for millennia. Suddenly, one simple question echoed throughout the archaeological world. If people could build something this sophisticated over 11,000 years ago, what else did we misunderstand about the origins of civilization? And that question would lead researchers toward a discovery that challenged one of history's oldest assumptions. The discovery that shattered history's timeline. When the dating results confirmed that Göbekli Tepe was more than 11,000 years old, archaeologists realized they were looking at something far more significant than an ancient monument. They were looking at a discovery that challenged one of the most widely accepted ideas about the origins of civilization. But to understand why Göbekli Tepe changed history, we first need to understand what historians believed before it was found. ###The story we thought we knew. For generations, history books followed a simple timeline. After the last ice age, humans slowly learned how to grow crops and domesticate animals. Farming created a reliable food supply, allowing people to settle in one place instead of constantly moving in search of food. As villages grew larger, societies became more organized. Leaders emerged, trade expanded, and eventually people built temples, monuments, and the world's first cities. It was a logical sequence. Agriculture came first. Civilization came second, ***. This explanation shaped our understanding of human history for decades. Then Göbekli Tepe appeared. And suddenly, that timeline didn't seem to fit anymore. ###The impossible monument. Imagine standing in front of a stone pillar weighing more than 15 tons. Now imagine trying to move it without cranes, trucks, metal tools, or even the wheel. That alone would be an incredible achievement. Now imagine repeating the process dozens of times, arranging those pillars into carefully planned circles, decorating them with detailed carvings, and completing the project with remarkable precision. This wasn't a temporary campsite. It wasn't a simple shelter. It was a monumental construction project that demanded planning, teamwork, and organization on a scale no one thought possible for people living around 9600 BCE. So the obvious question became: who organized all of this? ###hunter-gatherers or master builders. The people living during this period are generally described as hunter-gatherers. They hunted wild animals, gathered edible plants, and moved with the changing seasons. Traditional thinking suggested that these communities were relatively small and lacked the social structure needed for massive construction projects. Yet Göbekli Tepe tells a different story. Building even one enclosure would have required hundreds of people working together. Someone had to quarry the limestone. Someone had to transport the pillars. Others had to carve the artwork, prepare the site, and coordinate the entire effort. This level of cooperation suggests a society far more organized than historians once imagined. It doesn't necessarily mean they were a civilization in the modern sense. But it does show they possessed impressive planning skills, leadership, and shared goals. ###Did temples come before farms? One of the most influential ideas proposed after the discovery came from archaeologist Klaus Schmidt. He suggested something revolutionary. What if people didn't first build villages and then temples? What if they gathered for religious ceremonies first? And only later developed agriculture to feed the large groups assembling at places like Göbekli Tepe? It's a fascinating possibility. Imagine hundreds of people traveling from different regions to participate in seasonal rituals. Those gatherings would require enormous amounts of food. Over time, communities might have begun cultivating wild plants simply to support these events. If that's true, then religion, or at least shared ceremonial traditions, may have helped inspire one of humanity's greatest inventions, farming. It was a bold idea. And while archaeologists continue to debate the details, Göbekli Tepe undeniably forced researchers to reconsider how civilization may have begun. ###A new view of early humanity. For many years, our distant ancestors were often portrayed as people struggling to survive day by day. But Göbekli Tepe paints a very different picture. These people weren't only thinking about food and shelter. They invested enormous amounts of time and energy into creating something meaningful. Something symbolic. Something that would outlast generations. The site suggests that even 11,000 years ago, humans were capable of remarkable creativity, cooperation, and long-term planning. In many ways, Gobekli Tepe reminds us that our ancestors may have been far more sophisticated than we once believed. But the greatest mysteries were still waiting beneath the soil. Because as archaeologists uncovered more pillars, they noticed something extraordinary carved into nearly every surface. The animals weren't random decorations. They appeared to tell a story. One that researchers are still trying to understand today. The mysterious animal carvings, hidden symbols, and the secrets they may reveal about one of the world's oldest sacred sites, As archaeologists continued uncovering Gobekli Tepe, it became clear that the massive stone pillars were more than impressive pieces of architecture. They were covered with carefully carved images. Every enclosure seemed to tell a story, but it was a story written in symbols instead of words. The problem was that the people who built Gobekli Tepe left behind no written language. So today, more than 11,000 years later, we're left trying to understand a message from a civilization that never wrote a single sentence. A world carved in stone. The first thing researchers noticed was the incredible variety of animals carved into the limestone pillars. There were towering vultures with outstretched wings. Long, twisting snakes slithering across the stone. Powerful wild boars. Foxes frozen mid-stride. Scorpions with raised tails. Lions, gazelles, cranes, ducks, insects, and mysterious creatures that are still difficult to identify. What's surprising is that these weren't rough sketches. The carvings were remarkably detailed and showed an impressive understanding of anatomy and movement. Even after thousands of years, many of the figures remain clearly visible. It was obvious that these animals meant something important to the people who created them. But what? That question still has no definitive answer. More than decoration. At first glance, someone might assume the carvings simply represented the wildlife surrounding Gobekli Tepe. After all, the region was once home to many of these animals. But archaeologists quickly realized that the artwork appeared far too deliberate to be simple decoration. Certain animals appear repeatedly. Some pillars display combinations of creatures that don't naturally gather together. Others seem carefully positioned, almost as if they were part of a larger symbolic message. This suggests the carvings carried cultural, spiritual, or religious significance. Perhaps each animal represented a clan. Perhaps they symbolized different forces of nature. Or maybe they told stories that have been lost forever. Without written records, we can only study the evidence and form educated theories. The human-shaped pillars. One of the most fascinating discoveries wasn't an animal at all. It was the pillars themselves. At first, they appear to be simple T-shaped stones. But when archaeologists examined them more closely, they noticed something extraordinary. Several pillars feature carved arms running down their sides. Hands rest neatly across the front. Some even have belts, loincloths, and decorative details. In other words, the pillars may actually represent stylized human figures. If that's true, the two enormous pillars standing at the center of many enclosures could symbolize powerful individuals. Were they tribal leaders? Ancestors? Spiritual beings? Gods? No one knows for certain. But these discoveries transformed the pillars from ordinary building supports into something much more meaningful. The famous Vulture Stone. Among all the carvings at Gobekli Tepe, one pillar has attracted more attention than almost any other. Known as Pillar 43, or the Vulture Stone, it features an extraordinary collection of symbols. A large vulture dominates the scene. Nearby are a scorpion, other birds, geometric markings, and a headless human figure. To archaeologists, it's one of the site's greatest puzzles. Some researchers believe the vulture represents ancient burial rituals. In several early cultures, vultures played an important role in funerary traditions by consuming the bodies of the dead, leaving only the bones behind. Others argue the carvings may represent myths, sacred stories, or religious ceremonies. There are even researchers who believe the arrangement of symbols could reflect astronomical observations. Some have proposed that the carvings represent constellations visible in the ancient night sky. These ideas remain highly debated, and no single explanation has been accepted by the archaeological community. But one thing is certain. The people of Göbekli Tepe weren't randomly carving animals into stone. They were communicating ideas. Ideas that remain locked inside these monuments after more than 11,000 years. Did they understand the sky? One reason Göbekli Tepe fascinates researchers is its possible connection to astronomy. Throughout history, many ancient cultures carefully observed the stars, the sun, and the changing seasons. Could the builders of Göbekli Tepe have done the same? Some scholars suggest that the placement of certain enclosures and symbols may have had astronomical significance. Others argue there isn't enough evidence to support those claims. At the moment, the scientific community has reached no consensus. Ancestors? Spiritual beings? Gods? No one knows for certain. But these discoveries transform the pillars from ordinary building supports into something much more meaningful. The famous Vulture Stone. Among all the carvings at Göbekli Tepe, one pillar has attracted more attention than almost any other. Known as Pillar 43, or the Vulture Stone, it features an extraordinary collection of symbols. A large vulture dominates the scene. Nearby are a scorpion, other birds, geometric markings, and a headless human figure. To archaeologists, it's one of the site's greatest puzzles. Some researchers believe the vulture represents ancient burial rituals. In several early cultures, vultures played an important role in funerary traditions by consuming the bodies of the dead, leaving only the bones behind. Others argue the carvings may represent myths, sacred stories, or religious ceremonies. There are even researchers who believe the arrangement of symbols could reflect astronomical observations. Some have proposed that the carvings represent constellations visible in the ancient night sky. These ideas remain highly debated, and no single explanation has been accepted by the archaeological community. But one thing is certain. They were communicating ideas. Ideas that remain locked inside these monuments after more than 11,000 years. Did they understand the sky? One reason Göbekli Tepe fascinates researchers is its possible connection to astronomy. Throughout history, many ancient cultures carefully observed the stars, the sun, and the changing seasons. Could the builders of Göbekli Tepe have done the same? Some scholars suggest that the placement of certain enclosures and symbols may have had astronomical significance. Others argue there isn't enough evidence to support those claims. At the moment, the scientific community has reached no consensus. The people of Göbekli Tepe weren't randomly carving animals into stone.